Folks, I gave you a really good demonstration in training yesterday. You see, remember I mentioned that we learn by mistakes. Um, and you may remember that I talked about there being 10%, 20% and 70%. Well, I gave you 100% of the 10%. And of course it was boring and it was a lot of information, and I apologize for that. So today we're going to strive to get more of that 20% and get more group work. So Teresa's going to flick us into groups from time to time. We don't know who are groups and who are individuals, so she's treating you as individuals. So Micah, you've got a larger group there. You'll probably be on with a couple of others, a few others, and we're going to do that soon. One of the things we're going to do as we split into those groups is we're going to ask you to talk about what you picked up from yesterday and what you take on board for you as a trainer. So just to remind you what we're doing, over 3 sessions, we're thinking about learning and roles and effective ministry. Then today we're moving into delegation. And then tomorrow we think about coaching, because coaching is the part of delegation that makes delegation ministry, makes it personal, brings in discipleship and those sorts of things. The reason for the effective ministry stuff is to create the platform to think about how we pass on things. What does good ministry look like? The reason why we talked about leadership pipeline yesterday was because we wanted to think about the roles that the person is playing, that we're giving the ministry to, but we also consequently need to think about what is your new role therefore as a result. And in ministry we don't often do that. And then I finished with a really quick smash on learning principles, so I'm going to pick up from that. Yesterday, as we finished, I hung on, and there were some really good questions. And so I want to say today, we finish at 12:30, or just thereafter if I speak too much. And then I'll hang on, Teresa will jump off, and anyone who wants to hang around and ask a question, of course, can. You can still ask questions by the email process or the website. You might see in the chat room, the chat box, we've put the slides for today there for the delegation, so you can pick them up as well. I'm going to get you to start in the manual at page 12, which is the one that's entitled Equipping Ministry Apprentice and has Malcolm Shepherd at the top, because I do want to just sort of start in that position and start with that. I'll tell you what we might do, Teresa. I might need to log back on, so I might give people 5 minutes just now to go to that workshop and talk. And the aim is, I'd love you to share with your group, what did you learn about yourself yesterday and what you might do differently as you think about training MTS trainers. There was one other thing that I needed to say, I remember. Matthew was very, very helpful for me, and David Chan as well, to think about the different projects that people are delegating to MTS trainers. And I had made the assumption that as we delegate to an MTS trainer, we are delegating the role of team leadership or group leadership. And yet, for many of you, you're actually delegating the leader of leaders' jobs, the leaders of leaders' roles. And therefore, as you do that, you're going to need to recognize that your role moves to oversight. The person who moves to oversight type role needs to major on macro picture, needs to major on evaluation, needs to major on questioning the leader of leaders on how the system is going. So, for example, I might ask the questions, how do you think the ministry is going? How do you think we could do a better job in achieving discipleship? Do you think we could improve what we're doing? Are there any blank spots? It becomes much more macro questioning rather than detail questioning when you start asking the leader of leaders. The questions you might ask of a leader of leaders might include questions about the leaders. Who's your best leader and why? What do you think we need to establish amongst our leaders? So if you've delegated to the ministry trainees that sort of role, your questions move up another level as you start asking questions of the people below them rather than just the members of the ministry. I hope that makes sense. Teresa, let's go now for 5 minutes. If you can go into your groups, Teresa will throw you there. And when you come back, hopefully we'll be fully organised as needed. And so I want to ask the questions of you, and I'm not making any assumptions here. Do the people know what the ministry is and why the ministry is important? Because if they can understand why the ministry is important, there's an added incentive to want to do it well. Do you treat the person, the ministry trainee, as if they are in charge and they are responsible? Because if you don't, it's really easy to delegate a task to somebody and have them feel like you're lackey, to have them feel like they're actually doing your work, but they're just your arms and legs. If they don't own it, they can't really develop it and put their brain to it well. Which leads to the second one, the third one there, that the learner's experience. If the learner's experience is what's important, then the trainer's role steps into a support role, a role that helps them to reflect and move forward in their own project. And that's why one of the key skills in coaching comes up again and again as reflection, helping people to reflect on what they have done and what they are doing. And therefore that orientation, which is the second last point there to learning, says we need to be facilitating that reflection, facilitating discovery, rather than just telling people what to do, giving people advice. And again, that's classic coaching, which is why we're going to spend time in coaching. That's why when you look at this idea of the 10, 20, 70, you see that most of the learning happens as people are working through actual situations, whether they be simulated situations, like in role plays, or in on-the-job situations. It is actually not hard to move from the 10 into the 20. You simply ask people to reflect or workshop. And I mentioned to you yesterday, one of my cheat workshops is just to continue, and you write this down if you like, what would good look like? Present a piece of information and say, so what would good look like here? Or what would it look like if we were doing it well? Or how could we try and achieve those objectives better? And get people to think, and now you've moved into the 10-20, moved it from the 10 into the 20. I wanted to finish this bit about learning to just put a principle in front of you that I think is important as you go into coaching. This has been something that I learned when I was doing sales training at the age of 21. And then I became a trainer and had to train others, and it became more realistic. You see, this ladder of competence seems to be replayed over and over and over again, and some of you will have heard of it. It's the idea as I come to a new skill or a new task, I start off absolutely incompetent. I can't do it. But the truth is, as I start it, because it's totally fresh to me, I'm not aware that I can't do it. I'm unconsciously incompetent. The only way I move to the next level, which is I'm aware that I'm incompetent, conscious incompetence, is the fact that I do it and I see that I do it wrong. Now, what would a coach do to help me see that I'm doing it wrong? They might help me reflect, or I may not have the ability to reflect. So they might have to tell me, which is directive behavior. Peter, you're not doing it well. And so we recognize that the step from unconscious to conscious incompetence is a directive step, is a step where the coach tells someone that they are short. But the step from conscious incompetence to conscious competence is a step that is much more nuanced. You see, conscious competence is where I can do the task if I think about it. So think about learning how to drive. I start off as entirely unconsciously incompetent. It looks easy. Mum and dad, they drive. It's so easy. They just play with those pedals and they turn the steering wheel. As soon as I drive into the driver's seat, I realize, oh, gee, I haven't got this. I haven't worked out how to stay on the road. If I'm driving a manual, I'll bunny hop and things like that. And I practice and I drill and I rehearse, and somebody has to show me, and slowly I can consciously work out how to do it. What's the process to help me to a point where I can do it if I think about it? Well, the process will involve both directive behavior, telling, teaching, training, demonstration, instruction, but it will also require supportive behavior, the sort of behaviors that would encourage my heart, the sort of things that would help me to reflect, the sort of things that would help me to think that I'm not terrible. You see, because if I think that I'm terrible, I'm not going to keep on going. So there needs to be a mix of both directive and supportive behavior as I grow from conscious incompetence to conscious competence. The top level of being able to do it, thinking about driving a car, is when I can drive from A to B and I didn't really think about it. I changed the gears, but hey, that's just what I do because I know how to drive. And that's the top level of being able to do something. I do it without thinking. And how do I get from conscious competence to unconscious competence? The simple rule of thumb is practice, drill, rehearse. Keep doing it. This is where role plays are in a forte. Role plays through the development of competence and the development of unconscious competence. Now, I want to ask you, for most of the areas of ministry, where are you placed in terms of your competence, your level of competence on the task? And I would suggest for many areas of ministry, you will find that you are unconsciously competent. You just do it without thinking about it. This is why we do the exercise of that leadership pipeline thinking. For two reasons. Your role has changed, so your role is probably either consciously incompetent or consciously competent. Either way, you're going to have to think about what your new role, because it's different to what you did. That's the first thing. But the second thing to recognize is that the training zone is not in the unconscious zone. The training zone is in the unconscious zone. Is in the conscious zone. You need to train people by helping them to think about what needs to be done. So if you're unconsciously competent in a task, if you can do it without thinking, you're going to have to wind back a little bit as the trainer to recognize what is it that is required to do this task well. And so I've taken you through a few concepts of training that I hope are helpful. But what I just want to sort of edify you with is that is why the MTS process of watch me do it, and I will explain how I'm doing it, then have a go at doing it and doing it and doing it. And then when you're ready, train somebody else in doing it. That is a really good methodology to help people to run the ministry, to do a task. Watch me do it, help me explain the nuts and bolts, that's consciously competent. Then have a go at it. When I have a go at it, I'm going to be in this unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, or conscious competence place. Now keep doing it until you move into at least a confidence with your conscious competence, a confidence in doing it, but thinking about it. And then teach somebody else. It is amazing how as you teach somebody else, you explore consciousness to another degree. I hope that is helpful as we move into delegation. So I'm going to move into delegation now. And delegation starts on page 15 of your workbooks. As we move into delegation, I want you to recognize that you could be delegating a number of different tasks. Teresa Simon's there at the door waiting to get in. Thank you. You could be delegating a number of different tasks. As I think it was David pointed out to me yesterday, in Parachurch, he's probably delegating a project that they're leading. And the project might start with, what's the best way to deal with this situation? In many church roles, you will be delegating a ministry. You need to think about what we're going to delegate, and that's why the pre-work was there. I have 4 objectives as we go through this next hour or so, looking at delegation. And let me remind you, this is a half-day course on delegation, so we've truncated it considerably. But the first thing is just to have a clear understanding of why delegation is helpful to us. The second one is to explore why many of us had negative experience as we delegate. Delegation has a bum rap, and we're not going to spend a lot of time there. But most of our time is going to be looking at a simple approach to delegation so that you can walk away with a plan to delegate the ministry that you have in front of you. What is delegation? Let's just start this. I love a dictionary definition that has the word itself in the definition. It's pretty impressive. Delegation is the act of delegating. Yay! Delegation really is, though, transferring the responsibility and the ownership of a task, a project, a ministry to somebody else. It could be to enable you to do what you need to do best, or it could be to engage others and train others in skills through participation and leadership. There are different reasons for delegation, but it is the act of handing over. Do the scriptures talk about delegation? Well, of course they do. And if we're in a half-day workshop, we'd spend a bit more time exploring this. My favourite passage, Ephesians 4, Exodus 18, where Moses gets told by his father-in-law, listen, brother, you're the problem. You're not passing the tasks on. Romans and 1 Corinthians passages, which reminds us that the Lord gave us people to serve with different skills. But this is the passage that I want to go to for delegation, because it's such a clear example in Acts 6, at the start of Acts 6. You'll know it well. In these days, well, I won't read through it. Hopefully you've read it. No, I will read through it. In these days, when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Greeks, the Hellenists, rose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food. Is the daily distribution of food important? You betcha it is. And the 12 summoned the full number of the disciples, and they said, it's not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables. So the apostles are making a call. It's not right that we do this, but it's important that it is done. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to do this duty. We will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. So this is the leadership pipeline sort of activity that we talked about yesterday. They were clear of what it was most important for them to be doing. They had discerned that their role was the preaching and the teaching. But they also recognized that the tables it was important that the widows were served. And so they wanted to find people who could be served. Did they find just anybody? No, they decided that there needed to be people of good repute, full of spirit and wisdom. And of course, you all know that as you read on from this, those people weren't just servers. Stephen evangelized and was stoned. He was one of these 7. So there were characteristics that were there. This is magnificent delegation, a great example of delegation. So let me capture delegation in a picture, and this is there in your books. The act of delegating, as I said, is really just handing over a task to somebody. You're on page 16 in your books. Handing over a task to somebody, and a task is really just a series of decisions and leadership positions. We use the pipe model. Some people will love this, other people will hate it. The idea is the pipe is meant to represent the task that has been delegated. And what I'm actually delegating is a series of decisions which are represented by the white lines in the blue pipe. The width of the pipe could be narrow. Width of the pipe could be fat. The width of the pipe is meant to represent the span of control that you have been given as I delegate it to you. You see, the span of control could be dictated by the size of the decisions I'm allowing to you make, the resources that are available. Jack, you've got power over this. You can make decisions up to the value of $200. But if it goes to $201, you're not delegated that authority. That comes to me. Could be $2,000, could be $20,000, but that's the width of the pipe. The width of the pipe could be determined by legalities or safety things. You can go to there, but not to there. Micah, I want to say you can use anybody in the church for this task, but because this is for youth and children, you can only go to people who are working with children check. There's a legality that is constraining your pipe. And so I'm giving you a series of decisions based upon a span of control to achieve a defined output. And we'll talk about sport later on as we seek to describe what is involved in the task. But I don't leave you on your own, because Jack, the average Jack, not you, Jack, the average Jack, if I just hand over the task, you will fall over, because most people will hit that unconscious incompetent stage and just not know what to do. So this is why coaching is the bread and butter of delegation. And coaching is what we do when we check in over time. Now, if I don't trust Jack a lot, if I think this task is too much for him, or he can't make decisions well, I'm going to check in regularly, maybe every day, maybe every week. That is a measure of whether Jack is competent and I trust him with it. It is not always trust in the person. It may be trust in the competence of the person. What I do not want to do is set Jack up for failure. But you see, this might be a fairly straightforward task, and I can trust Jack to go 4 weeks before we need to check in. And so that might be that we check in 4 weeks. So I can use the way I check in to limit the span or increase the span of control. But that's delegation. I've handed over the decisions to Jack. I've told him there's a limit to his decision. I've made it clear that there's an output, and we're going to talk about it as we go in. That is what we're talking about, delegation. Otherwise, we refer to it as multiplication of ministry. What I'd like to do now is quickly hand over to you and give you 5 minutes in groups. Now, we haven't thought about how we divide up these groups, Teresa, but I would like some groups to think about the benefits of delegation to you, the person delegating. I would like some groups to think about the benefits of delegation to the individual that we're delegating to, the ministry trainee. And then I'd like others to think about the benefits of delegation to the church that we are working in. Teresa, are we able to instruct people on the topics?
Yep, sure. So if you're in an even numbered group, you can do the first box, which is to you. If you're in an odd numbered group, you can do to the individual. And there's a few who are live streaming in sort of breakout, like they've got enough people to discuss on their own. So those people who didn't join a breakout room, you can discuss to the church.
Terrific. And if I could ask you when you come back, could one person in the group, not every group will get to report, but we want to get a couple of groups just to report what are the benefits of delegation to these different 3 groups. And we're going to report, just so you know, backwards. The church, the individual, then you, the delegator. Okay, how did we go? Can I have somebody from one of the groups to tell us what are the benefits of delegation to the church? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Go for it. Yes.
Okay. Raising up more people, so more ministries accomplished. Helps us to live out the doctrines we believe, that the church is the body of Christ, the priesthood of all believers, which in turn helps people belong to church more, buy into church and feel empowered for the vision and purpose of church. People's relationships also increase, kind of that sense of teamwork, togetherness, fellowship. It increases the humility of church leadership, as people often do things better than we could, and grows people's skills, raises up leaders to think about the future of the church, the next generation, but also the wider church beyond our church to be able to send out for the sake of the kingdom. There are a couple of things we had.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you. Liam, does your group have anything to add to that? Or was pretty much covered?
Yeah, that nailed it. Oh, man.
That was excellent, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You see how delegation is good for Christ's church. You can see how Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, the body functions. And it's not just the body in your suburb, it's the body globally, whatever that means. Thank you, guys and girls, if you allow me to use those terms. Someone from the odd groups, I'd love to now hear just what are the benefits of delegation to the delegate, the ministry trainee we've delegated to? I can't see everyone, so anyone who just wants to unmute, who's that? On you, Peter.
Yeah, I can say some things. We discussed it, and we went, look, they get some meaningful responsibility, and that's really helpful. We often thought, done well, they get clarity on what to do as well when you delegate, because you've got to think through what you're going to give them. So they get meaningful responsibility, good clarity. They get the opportunity to grow, but also they get the opportunity to work on becoming a leader of leaders.
Yes.
Because if you delegate to them and they can go, but I can delegate some of the things I've been delegated, it just gives them the opportunity to work on capacity, not just the task. And we also said often we're delegating things that we've got less time for because we're pressed. And so they bring new creativity, new ideas. And so often you get better results.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Does anybody else from an odd number want to contribute anything? Anything additional?
We were looking at the question as well, and the opportunity to fail comes with delegation as well. So if you actually give them the whole responsibility for a thing, there is an opportunity for failure there and to learn from that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Matthew. Anyone else want to say something?
The only other thing that our group added was just it does develop a sense of trust between the trainer and the trainee as you give them, so as people have said, that kind of real meaningful responsibility that gives them the chance to take it, own it, and think, I'm being entrusted with this real ministry.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And you pick up the difference between lackey versus trust. If you're my lackey, you don't get that feeling. But if I've handed over and delegated well, you do get that feeling. And that's the difference often between good and poor delegation in principle. Also don't miss that if I'm being delegated to, the very act of having to do something under God helps me to understand my theology in practice. It is so easy for us, particularly us evangelicals, to be bound up in knowledge and say, I know, and not be rooted in practice. And by leading and having somebody leading me through it, I get the opportunity to experience faith and live faith and be trained in living faith, which is very, very powerful and helpful. Thank you. So someone from the even group, you'll notice I went to us, the delegator, last. Have we got someone from who wants to say something representing the even groups?
Yeah, I can go.
On you, Jess.
We were talking about just the benefit of multiplying ourselves, but also thinking it helps us to think intentionally about our ministries and what is it we're trying to communicate, which I think helps us to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah.
And should grow us in humility, that we're not the solution to every ministry need, as we're reminded that we're part of a body and that God's gifted people with different things, and just the joy as well that we get to experience of seeing other people use their gifts as we delegate things to them.
This is part of the richness of being the overseer or leader of leaders, is learning to get joy from seeing fruit grow on other people's trees and being thankful to God for his willingness to do that. As you say, to expand my ministry by me not doing things other than handing over. It's wonderful. Does somebody have something to add to that at all? Anyone else from an odd group, an even group? Three, two, one. There we go. Well done. You can see there are benefits to delegation to us as the church. And you notice the order in which I asked you to present it. I started with the church. I then started with the delegate and then went to the delegator, because as Jess and somebody else said, there is a humility in delegation. One of the things we need to really learn as we delegate, as we are handing over ownership, we are handing over responsibility. Now, the hard thing about delegation is we never lose responsibility. We never lose ownership, but we've entrusted it into somebody else's hands. And that makes delegation dangerous. It makes it difficult. And so as we move on, we're going to notice that that is where delegation often finds itself falling over. So let me just move into a few principles of delegation that I think are important to understand. Firstly, you made it quite clear, Jess, delegation is not dumping. I've actually handed over and gained ministry. So therefore, a person who's delegating well will often think about it in the second person, what's in it for me? What's in it for the delegate? What's in it for the ministry trainee? Because we want them to feel valued. We want them to feel like they're doing ministry as they're doing it. So as we hand over delegation, we need to understand what's in it for the delegate. Why are we handing it to them? Not why am I getting rid of it? And that's why we go through the benefits to the church, to the person, and then us, because the benefits to the person and to the church will be the reasons why the people want to take it up. I'm not telling us to play to the selfishness of people, but I am asking us to recognize is that we are all selfish. And if you just make it and try to be altruistic with this, you will find that the selfish person misses out on part of the reason why they should be engaged. That's a hard thing to say, but it's a sinful truth, right? Delegation is not abdication. It is not handing it over and leaving it. You see, what we find in the Australian, in fact, the global management or leadership position is there's this natural pendulum that swings, and it swings between micromanagement and laissez-faire management. Micromanagement means when you feel that I'm over you on every detail and I'm managing every piece of detail and not really handing it over. It feels terrible, right? The other side of that pendulum is laissez-faire management. I give it to you, Jess, and I'm not checking in. I'm not following you up and you're left alone. And neither of them is good. We want to find a sweet spot in the middle. In fact, the most common style of leadership in the business world is, and let alone the church world, is referred to by us as seagull management. I don't know if you've ever heard of seagull management, but seagull management looks like this. I give you the task, I hand it over to you. I fly away and leave you to it. I'm a seagull, I've flitted away. That's called laissez-faire management. But I come back and I found that you've made lots of mistakes. And what do? I dump on you. I poop on you. And just imagine how you feel. You feel terrible. You feel unsupported. You feel like you've been overly trusted and now you're untrustworthy because you stuffed up. That is not good delegation. But unfortunately, that is one of the #1 styles of delegation in our country, not just in our churches. And that's why delegation quite often gets a bum rap. So I want to highlight to you, there are three key principles that we want to pick up when it comes to delegation. And they're on page 20 in your books. There are 3 phases. The first one is clear expectations, shared expectations, where both parties are aware of what needs to be done. That example that I just did with Jess, it is unfair for me to have Jess leave the table and not know exactly what she thinks she should be doing, and me not knowing what she should be doing. She needs to leave the table with clear shared expectations of what is involved, what her authority is, what's the responsibility, what does good look like. And having done that, I can let her go and do it, and I can support her on it. That's where many of us leave it. But let's just say, Jess, if it's okay, I'll keep picking on you because you're on my screen. When Jess does the task, if it's an important task, it's worthwhile following up and evaluating. You see, Jess put some sweat, maybe some tears, but she certainly put effort into this task. When I don't follow up and evaluated, how does Jess feel about the task? How does Jess feel about herself? She might feel that the task is unimportant. She was given an unimportant task. She might feel that she is unimportant. Peter doesn't care enough to follow up. Didn't Peter notice the effort I put in? Didn't Peter notice that I did such a good job here? She might have stuffed up badly. I wonder if Peter knows that I stuffed up. Did I get away with it? Did I, none of that is good. No, Jess is entitled, and the task is entitled, for us to evaluate together how she went. And depending upon how competent Jess is, I may just ask her to evaluate and us to talk about it if she's fully competent. Now we're into conscious competence, right? If Jess is unconsciously competent, unconsciously incompetent or consciously incompetent, I might have to be the one who helps her see where she's done well or where she needs to improve. That is evaluation, and that is the start of accountability. But you see, evaluation is dead if it doesn't have the third piece, which is consequence management. So let's just say Jess did a really fantastic task. Now, knowing Jess, she probably did, right? We evaluate and see that she did a good task. What is the consequence that she deserves for having done a good task, having done it well? At the very least, she deserves thanks, right? Recognition is what is important and deserved when a job is done. Now, I could do recognition many, many different ways. If Jess does a fantastic job and I don't manage the consequences, how does she feel? Did Peter even notice? Does the task matter? Did Peter give me an unimportant task? Do I matter? All of those questions can start to come in. Now, there are different ways to reward, and I need to know Jess better to know the best way to recognise her. I might recognise her in front of the congregation. That might be powerful for her. That might play to her ego and might be terrible. That might crush her and embarrass her. I need to know her to think about how I might give her recognition. I started at a company. This will give you an indication of how old I am now. I was heading up business development. The company had two parts to it. One of them was a technical part. They were clinical research people. The other part were a sales and marketing part. I offered all people a CD voucher. There's my age coming in. A CD voucher for anybody who would give us a business lead. All the commercial people, the sales and marketing people said, fantastic, and they gave me business leads. The technical people, the clinical research people came back to me and said, how dare you try and bribe me to give you leads? I'll give you leads if you want them. Now, the point of me saying that is not to say that either was right or wrong, but to say that they were different. And I needed to understand that different people are recognized in different ways. Now, let's just imagine if it is at all possible that Jess did a poor job on this task. What would consequence management look for Jess doing a poor job? You see, if I don't manage the consequences, Jess might think the same things again. Oh, the task didn't matter. I got away with it. I don't matter. What would consequence management look like when Jess does a bad job? Did she know she did a bad job and she did a bad job because she couldn't be stuffed? Well, that might be time for rebuke. Did she do a bad job because she wasn't competent? What would consequence management be? Well, it might start with, how could we do it better? And an equipping or training thing to help her to do it better. You see, for every task, those three steps need to be there. Shared expectations, clear evaluation, and consequence management. And if you take nothing else away from delegation, if you can see those three parts in delegation, you're doing well. Now, what I want to do in the next, between now and the end, and we'll have a break at 1 o'clock for 5 minutes to go and get a cup of coffee. But I want to just walk through a process for delegation. And I'd like you, as you are doing the delegation, to be thinking of the task, the ministry, whatever it is you're handing over to the particular ministry trainee or a particular ministry trainee that you're responsible for, and try and workshop that as we go through. Not all stages of the workshop can be done because you've already done part of it. But the process, the methodology for delegation we're going to use is on page 21 of your workbooks. And it is just a methodology. There are lots of different ways of doing it. But here's the delegation process in a nutshell. Ideals. I stands for introducing the task to a particular person. Choosing a task, choosing a person. D stands for demonstrate clearly what needs to be done. And E for ensure understanding. So by the time we go through D and E, we should have clear expectations, shared expectations of what is involved and what needs to be done. As we go into implementation, I need to A, allocate authority, information, and resources. And once the person has everything that's needed, I then need to let go, which is where many of us fail in delegation, and therefore we get accused of micromanagement. And then support and monitor is there because, well, coaching starts with a C, not with an S. Support and monitor is that checking in and that coaching. So let's just move through I, and then we'll take a break and get a coffee. Of course, introducing the task means choose the task and choose the person that we're going to delegate to. But in pure delegation, if we were doing a delegation workshop, I would want you to work out what are the tasks that you can't delegate. So I would want you to spend some time looking at what you do and think, what are the things I can pass on? What are the things I must not pass on? Go back to Acts 6, remember? The apostles held on to the teaching, the preaching. They passed on what they felt wasn't essential for them to do, but still needed to be done. There may well be tasks that you see in your role that actually don't even need to be done, or in your church. Those decisions are really very, very valuable. But for this workshop, we've assumed that you will delegate a ministry that you've already chosen, and you've already chosen the delegate being a ministry trainee. So we're not going to workshop this part of it, but I want to just give you a heads up of the methodology, and you've got the slides. What tasks can be delegated? Well, typically tasks that can be delegated are tasks that don't have to be done by you. You want an indication of that? Look at the leadership pipeline and look at the tasks that were part of the role that you used to have on the leadership pipeline. They could be tasks that you're handing to someone to train them or to energize them. They could be more routine decisions. In definition stage, we would say these are things that are not core to your role. Are there tasks that you should retain? Well, these are the tasks that are core to your role. I believe you should never delegate supervision of subordinates. Let me get this straight. I mentioned yesterday, or maybe I didn't mention yesterday, you might have 4 to 8 people who you are actively discipling who report to you. If you have those 8 people and in a structure, they are your direct report, if they're your direct report, you must not delegate their supervision. Delegation of supervision is a change in structure. So if you can't supervise them, you need to change the structure, because the most undermining thing that you can do for a person is say, Matthew, you report to me, but I'm going to ask Bob to manage you. It tells Matthew straight away he doesn't really matter. No, Matthew, I want to make sure that you're looked after so well that I'm going to change the structure and I'm going to ask Bob to take full responsibility for you. That makes Matthew important, and he is. So we need to recognize what are the things we can't delegate. Then we can select the delegate. Now, this is where we would do a workshop, simple workshop like this. You've got the slides to try and sort through our roles. We're not going to do that in this workshop. As we select the delegate, though, you now need to look for the right person for the right task. In university ministry, we talked about fat people, not an obesity problem, but faithful, available, and teachable. As we move into para-ministry and church ministry, we find that we have much fewer fat people than we had in university life. And so we need to recognize that we will not always find the exact fit for delegation. But we need to think about why we're delegating. Remember that middle column of the workshop we just did? Why is it beneficial for the delegate? As we communicate to the person we're delegating to them, we need to be very, very clear as to why we are delegating so that they can understand. And I want to say, don't always be too quick to choose your person for two reasons. The person who often comes to mind is often already doing lots of things, and they will just let you down or they will get burnt out because you're putting another thing on their plate. But the other reason why you don't choose the first person is because what you often find is the first person you think of is actually the wrong person because your brain played a trick on you. So let's a quick test. I'm looking for somebody to oversee and lead the welcoming process on Sunday. What's the type of person I'm looking for? Who is the type of person I'm looking for? What skills am I looking for? Now, some of you will have gone straight to, let's say, Barbara, who's a wonderfully welcoming person and really loves welcoming and is really good at welcoming. If you chose Barbara, your brain played a trick on you. Because I'm not looking for someone to be the welcomer. I'm looking for somebody to oversee welcoming, to lead welcoming. So yes, I want someone who appreciates welcoming, but I'm going to need somebody who can lead and organize a team, who can oversee a team. And if I go and choose Barbara, who can't lead a team, I've just set her up for failure. You see how the brain played a trick on me. So I want to choose the right person. But I also want to be able to sell the right person why I choose them. I want to be able to explain, Bob, this is why we chose you. This is why I think you'd be good on it. This is why I'm trusting you. So if we were doing this workshop in practice, I would ask you to name the task that you're delegating, and then I'd ask you to choose at least two people and explain the reason why. And it's as you start thinking about the reason why that you will identify that you chose the wrong person. And I guarantee you, when we do this in a workshop, half of us choose the wrong person first off, but the second choice became the right choice. So you need to think about what the job is and who the person is it. We would get you doing a workshop where you're setting the person up. I'm asking you to lead this ministry because I believe you are well suited to leading this ministry because. These are the lines that you need to be able to say to your ministry trainee. I'm asking you to lead this ministry because this ministry is important, this ministry is about, this ministry plays this important role in this church and the way we make disciples. And Bob, I'm choosing you, not just because you're a ministry trainee, but because I think you've got the gifts of. I think you'd be great in this position. There are some areas you're going to have to learn. And you watch, Bob will come on more clearly having done that. Okay, why don't we go and get a cup of coffee, take a break? I've taken a bit more time, so maybe if I could ask you to make a quick cup of coffee, and we'll start at 10 past. Not 10 past, so that's 6 minutes. If I could just get you back in about 3 minutes, would that be all right? Just enough time for a quick stretch. 3 minutes. Matt, I'm looking at you. Are you nodding or shaking your head? Is that all right? Good on you. Matt made the decision. I'll see you soon. I'll just say whilst we're waiting, there are some of you who, when we looked at Leadership Pipeline, found the idea of oversight confronting. And I want to say to you, almost everybody finds the movement from leading teams to overseeing organizations very difficult because it is such a big shift and the skill sets required are so different. I came across this book. It's a secular book. Patrick Lencioni, some of you know, is a Catholic and he's American, therefore he writes with a vaguely Christian sort of backdrop. This is a fantastic book for helping people think about what it is to be the overseer. If you've ever read any of his books, you'll know that he writes in sort of a parable. The parable of this book is a guy who's leading an IT company, and he's the expert at everything, and so he's doing everything. And so the parable is to help that person realize that he is the problem in the company moving forward. And so it's as with Patrick Lencioni books, they're very easy to understand, but it was only launched last year. It's called The Motive. It's the book he wished he wrote before he wrote Dysfunction of a Team, if you've read that. But it's very helpful to help people think about what it is to move that next level to lead an organization. And these are the skills that very few people were taught, even in business, but clearly at theological college. So I'd recommend that to you if you're wrestling with what is it to be the overseer. There'll be some hints in that book. And as with all Patrick Lencioni's, if you go to the back chapter, you'll see the key messages. There are 5 key messages. So it's very helpful. Okay, we got people back. Let me go back to sharing screen and we'll move through the remainder of the ideals steps. So if the first step in ideals is to introduce the task and introduce the person, which you have already done. You've actually decided to employ a person as a ministry trainee. Hopefully you've chosen the task that they're going to run. Demonstrate clearly and ensure understanding go together. Demonstrate clearly means, do they understand what good looks like? WDGLL is my shorthand for what does good look like. I'll give you a secret. As a consultant, this is my go-to. If I work with your church and feel like we need to, I'll just say, well, what does good look like on this one? And it's a very good way of brainstorming. So there's a good starting point. You can take the pressure off yourself, put a flip chart on the wall or get a whiteboard and say, why don't we work together and think about what good would look like on this task and work it through and then take a photo and there's like a project plan. That's what good looks like. If you want to work out what the measurables are, what would it look like if we were doing it well? And that will help you think about what the measurables are, the outcomes are. What does good look like is an excellent way. You might need to show examples of previous work. You might explain the objectives. You certainly will discuss the timelines, the timetable, any deadlines that are due so that people are there. You see, you want people to know that this task is important and they are important. Therefore, I'm going to follow you up. I will help you. I will support you. I will equip you and I will hold you accountable. So as they leave the table, they are clear with what is going to happen. They are clear of their role and your role. Jess, when we meet together, I'm going to ask you, what do you think you did well? You'll learn that in the coaching tomorrow. Jess, as we meet together, I'm going to ask you to tell me, what do you think you could have done differently? I want to prepare you for that conversation because I want you to learn that I am trustworthy to trust you. I am trustworthy to support you. I am trustworthy to do what you want you to do, which now conquers the first problem in most delegation processes. I, as the boss, as the delegate, will live up to my end of the bargain and we will be clear of responsibilities. If I've done that well, I have basically made it all clear. Now, if you found this visual helpful, you might lean on the visual to do it. You might say, let me explain to you the span of control that you have, or let me explain the limitations. That might work for you. By the way, you've got $2,000, I think I said, Jack. If it goes to 2001, it's out here. It's not your decision. It's my decision. You know, you might, if the visuals work, use the visuals, whatever works for you. But I now want to give you a cheat sheet, which is in your books. I think it's a very helpful tool. And some of you, this will be the major takeout for handing over delegation. It's called SPORT. You can download worksheets of this off both the CMD and the Partners in Ministry websites. But SPORT is a way of demonstrating clearly. And it's an acronym that simply is this. SPORT, what is the situation or context? Why do I need you to do this? Why is this ministry important? And how does it fit into our overall ministry? Remember yesterday in Effective Ministry, we talked about how we start to idolize the inputs rather than the outputs. We start to idolize what we're doing rather than what we're aiming to do. This is where we explain how this ministry fits in our mission to make disciples of our Lord Jesus Christ. We're playing kids' games because we want the kids to have fun. How does that link to how we are discipling kids? We want them to stay so we can talk to them about what Jesus said, blah, blah, blah. And that, you need to show the link to what we are trying to do as a church and as a ministry overall. Situation, context, how it fits in, how it fits into Jesus's great big plan, God's great big plan. Situation, then purpose. What's the purpose of this task, of this ministry? So I gave that trivial one there. The purpose here is that they play games and have fun because it fits into the task. Now, very rarely will that be the purpose or task, but I'm using a stupid example to help you see how there's a purpose for what we're doing here, which fits into our bigger purpose, which is trying to make disciples of all nations, or trying to make disciples in the suburb of Wahroonga or Menai, wherever. So situation, purpose, output. What are the expected outputs of this project? What will it look like when this project, this ministry is going well? Now, I gave you the big outputs yesterday of people growing more like Christ and people coming to know Christ. They might be two of the outputs that you want to talk about. But you might talk about the outputs in terms of inputs. We would see more people reading the Bible. We would see more people doing this. We would see people feeling welcomed as they come in. And here's the thing that we need to recognize is there is a tendency for us to bias either quality descriptive outputs or quantity numerical outputs. And typically we're going to need to do both so that we get the full picture. So I just don't want people to be welcomed, which might be quantitatively. Quantitatively, we might have 20% of people, 30% of people coming back. Qualitatively, we might say, we want people to feel like they're loved. We want people to leave knowing that we care for them. And then you would ask the question, how would we know that? What would we see? And so this output question might require you to do a little bit of a brainstorm. What would it look like if we were doing this well? What would we see when this has been done well? And again, you don't have to always come up with that. The other person can come up with that. Situation, context, the purpose of this ministry, and when we see this ministry done well, here's what I'm going to measure you by. Resources. What are the resources you'll have available to you? What are the dollars? I said to Jack, you can have $200 or $2,000. I won't give him his choice. I'll be quite explicit as to which one it is. What are the resources that are available? Not just dollars, time. I'm going to give you the time of the assistant. I'm going to give you the time in the building. I'm going to give you access to the photocopier machine. I'm going to give you the ability to use the church or the building. What are the resources that are available to you? I said before in an example, you can use any of the people in the church, but they need to have done a welcome with children check. Think about the resources that are available, which includes your time and their time. But what are the limits? Dollar limits, safety limits. In the COVID era, there's significant safety limits, right? We need to be explicit with those. And again, you can do this together. You might say, Jeff, I want to give you all of this authority. Look, there are COVID limits. I can't think of what they are right now, but let's come back to that. Don't stop the process because you haven't prepared. We have a tendency in ministry to stop everything until I'm completely happy before I hand it over. What I want to encourage you to do is to not do that. Think with the person, because then you're showing them how to think rather than giving them a piece of paper. So that's resources. And then T is the time to completion. Time to completion will include several things. It will certainly include the timing of check-in. I'm going to see you in 2 weeks, Jess, and we'll talk about that. Is there anything you need to have done in 2 weeks? That's time to completion. I need to do a report to the church council by the end of the quarter. So I'm going to need you to do a report by end of February. I'm making quite explicit deadlines. Here's a problem for those of us who are poorly organised. We haven't really thought about the deadlines that are there. So deadlines could be reports or updates. I need to tell the church in 2 weeks, or it could just be the check-in, or it could be the completion of the ministry. It's a camp that's going to, and it's going to be done by this time. All registrations need to be done by that. But this will need to be very clear. So there's sport. There's sport as an acronym. I'm going to send you off to do a sport workshop on your own in a moment. But I want to just cover off before I go there, the other side of, so if D is demonstrate clearly, E is ensuring understanding, and the two of them go together. Jess, here's what I'd like you to do. Do you understand what you need to do? You see, if I've just gone blah, well, she's a different person. She uses different language. She sees things differently. She might be an abstract person and I'm a numerical person. I need to check that we're on the same page. Remember, ensure shared objectives, shared understanding, shared expectations. So it is fair that I say, Jess, what did you hear me say? I might ask her to repeat what needs to be said. I might ask her to clarify what she heard. But what I need to do is to secure commitment from her as to what's going to be done. And therefore, D and E go together. Now, by the way, this is where I say, Jess is a very, very clever woman. She knows this area well. She just hasn't led it before. So I might actually take this sport process and say, Jess, you know this really well. Why don't you have a first bash at this? So I'm going to reverse E and D. I'm going to get Jess to determine what needs to be done. And then I'm going to be the one who says, yeah, okay, I'm on board with that. That depends entirely on the person I'm delegating to. But the most important thing is by the time we've finished D and E in delegation, by the time she leaves the table, we have a clear understanding, a shared expectation of what's going to be done. Clear? Okay, I want to give you 5 minutes. We won't be able to share it with each other, but 5 minutes. I'd love you just to quickly work through sport on your workbook. You'll see on page, you can either use, there's 2 pages of sport, choose one of them. And I'd love you just to have a quick bash for a few minutes at working through sport for the ministry that you're handing over. You've already done a large chunk of this in pre-work. Now I'm asking you to organise it into this thinking of situation, purpose, output, resources, and time to completion. Go for it. Okay, we'll just give a few more seconds for people to click in. So you can see 5 minutes really isn't enough time for that, but hopefully it gives you a taste. If we were doing the half-day workshop, we put 20 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes on that, and you will see, particularly given the pre-work that you've done, it actually isn't that hard to do, but the sport provokes the thinking. This is why sport, I think, is a helpful prompt for that workshop, where I mentioned, Jess, why don't you tell me what it was going to say? We can do this on a whiteboard together. Hey, I was at this course and I learnt this acronym, sport. Why don't we just work through it? You can download the sheet off the website and use it if you want. Whatever it is useful for you. The aim at the end of the day is to be able to leave the table with shared expectations of what's going to happen next. If I leave the table with shared expectations, now I can almost set you off to do it. But there's one thing I need to do, and there's one thing that is a real common thing in a failure that occurs in delegation, which is this A, which is allocate all authority, information, and resources. You see, Jess, I'll keep picking on you here. You see, I told Jess she could use the photocopier. But what I forgot is that Brendan uses the photocopier. He's our office administrator. He uses the photocopier and he's in charge of the photocopier and he rules the photocopier with an iron fist. And he uses the photocopier all day Thursday to prepare leaflets for church. So I need to do two things. I need to prepare Jess for Brendan's role, and I need to prepare Brendan for Jess's role. Otherwise, I'm going to set her up for conflict. So Jess, I said you could use the photocopier, but tell me what day you want to use it. By the way, you can't use it on Thursday because that's when we do the brochures. And I'm going to tell Brendan that you've got the authority to do so. Otherwise, what's going to happen is Brendan's going to say, you can't use the photocopier, and just say, yes, you can. Yes, I can. Peter said I could. Well, he didn't say that to me. Brendan's just doing his role. So I need to unplug any holes that will be there. So I'm going to need to have talked to Jess, to the delegate, about what needs to be done. There may well be people I need to tell that she has the authority to spend money. Does she know how to spend money? Does she know how to claim money? This is where I allocate the resources and set her up for success. Of course, I will also make it clear to her how often we're going to meet. And this is an important piece of the puzzle. You remember back on the picture of delegation, the pipe model, I said I can show how much I trust a person by the span of control, the time that I put in between check-ins. If the span of time will be determined by two things: the level of trust I have in the delegate and the level of trust I want to show, and the level of trust I have in their capability. You see, I never want to set them up for failure. So if I think that the person can go 2 weeks and they can't stuff up, well, that might be a reasonable time. It might be 1 week. But if we've been meeting weekly, and then I see that Jess is growing in her confidence and her competence, it may be appropriate that I say to Jess, well, now we can meet every 2 weeks or every month. Now, the message that Jess needs to pick up as I say that, and I need to make explicit, is, Jess, this is a demonstration of my trust in you. This is increasing the pipe because I trust in you. And this is where we get it wrong too often. I send Jess away with a very, very large pipe. I set her up for failure and she fails. And guess what I have to do? I have to narrow the pipe. How do you think she feels? She feels demotivated. She sees my lack of trust, my reduced amount of trust, and she feels demotivated. So I want to get these 3 steps before this clear so that as I send her out, I'm setting her up for success. And then I can let go. I can let her go knowing that we're going to catch up in 2 weeks to meet and to discuss how she went. Now, many of us, when we check in during the next 2 weeks, we want to check in because Jess is a great woman and I want to see how she's going. The problem is when I see her on Sunday, I say, hey, Jess, how are you going on that? Jess hears me as checking up on her. And so for many of us, we're going to have the discipline as we delegate to hold our tongue and speak to her and wait for 2 weeks. Now, I wished I'd learned when I first started leading this line. And then when I use it, it works really well. When I don't use it, I find I stuff up. You see, I want Jess to understand why I'm not going to ask her over the next 2 weeks. And so there's a simple line. Hey, Jess, I've learned that when I check in with you between now and your next meeting, that quite often that's interpreted as micromanagement. I'm going to try not to check in with you. I'm going to try not to ask you how you're going. If I do, I'm just showing that I care. But I'm going to try not to, and I'm going to wait till that appointment we have in 2 weeks. You can come to me at any time, but I'm going to try to wait until we have an official check-in, and then we can check in on how you're going. And when that line is used, it works really well. So I can let go, and then in 2 weeks, I can meet up with Jess, and we will coach. And as we coach, I will support her as a person. I will support her on the task, and I will help her to solve her problems and the problems as she leads the project. Friends, that is delegation in 90 minutes or 80 minutes. As you can see, we could have spent a lot more time on that, but that is the crux of what we are trying to do as we hand over ministry. We want to be like the apostles in Acts 6, knowing what we need to do, knowing that God has given us others who can serve him well, that the church might flourish, and set them up to do the best job that they can as they multiply the ministry that is before us. So we're going to finish there. I might pray. Then we're going to end the call. And anybody who wants to stay on and ask a question about yesterday or today, feel free to hang on. And I can stay till 1 o'clock. Okay? Let me pray. Father God, I thank you that you have blessed us with your word, with your spirit, and with people in our church. Father, we pray that you might equip us and help us to consciously pass on ministry well, to consciously equip others in ministry well, that you might be glorified and that your mission to save the world would be achieved. We put this in your hands and we ask that you'd help us as we seek to do this in our Lord Jesus' name. Amen.